The kitchen was dying, and Simone Laurent could feel it in her bones. She stood at the stainless steel counter of Maison Belle, the restaurant that had been her family's heartbeat for 43 years, and watched her sous chef pack his knives into a worn canvas bag that made 3 staff members gone in 2 weeks. Soon it would just be her, alone with the ghosts of 1,000 perfect meals and the crushing weight of inevitable failure. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday. Clean, corporate, merciless. The building had been sold. New ownership would take possession in 60 days. No exceptions. No negotiations. Maison Belle, along with the bakery below and the bookshop next door, would be demolished to make way for luxury condominiums that nobody who actually lived in this neighborhood could afford. Simone had cried exactly once, locked in the walk-in freezer where the cold could match the ice spreading through her chest. Then she had wiped her face, straightened her chef's coat, and returned to the dinner service. Because that was what her grandmother had taught her. You could grieve later. Right now, there was food to prepare, and people to feed, and dignity to maintain even when the world was falling apart around you. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, she was catering the Harrington Foundation Gala, a glittering affair where the city's wealthiest gathered to write checks and feel virtuous. The irony was not lost on her. She was cooking for the very people who were erasing places like hers from the city's landscape, one luxury development at a time. The ballroom glowed with champagne light and excessive flowers. Simone moved through the service entrance with her small team, carrying trays of her signature creations: seared scallops with blood orange reduction, duck confit with cherry gastrique. Each dish was a small rebellion, a reminder that beauty and craft existed beyond balance sheets and profit margins. She was arranging the dessert table when she saw him. Julian Thorne stood near the bar, surrounded by people but somehow separate from them all. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 37 or 38, with sharp features that suggested both intelligence and ruthlessness. His suit probably cost more than her monthly rent. Everything about him screamed power from his confident posture to the way others gravitated toward him, seeking his attention like planets around a sun. This was the man who was destroying her life. Simone had seen his photograph in the business section countless times. Julian Thorne, the real estate developer who had transformed the city's skyline, who bought properties and reimagined them into gleaming towers of glass and steel. He was brilliant, people said. Visionary. A man who saw potential where others saw only decay. What he actually saw, Simone thought bitterly, was profit. And he didn't care what he crushed to get it. She should have walked away, should have focused on her work and ignored him. But something hot and reckless was building in her chest, fueled by weeks of fear and frustration and grief. Before she could stop herself, she was crossing the ballroom floor, weaving between designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. "Mr. Thorne." Her voice was steady, despite the hammering of her heart. He turned, and she was struck by his eyes. They were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds over the ocean. For a moment, he looked at her with such focused intensity that she forgot how to breathe. "Yes?" His voice was deep, cultured, with the faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. "Simone Laurent. I'm the head chef and owner of Maison Belle, the restaurant in the Bellwood building. The building you just purchased and plan to demolish?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Miss Laurent, I've heard of your restaurant. Quite well regarded, I understand." "Well regarded enough that you might reconsider turning it into rubble?" A woman next to Julian gasped at her boldness, but he raised a hand, silencing whatever rebuke was coming. His expression remained neutral, but she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Amusement or annoyance, she couldn't tell. "The building is structurally unsound," he said calmly. "It's a liability. Renovation would cost more than reconstruction. That building has been standing for 80 years. It has history, character, meaning. things that can't be measured on a spreadsheet. And it also has faulty plumbing, outdated electrical systems, and foundation issues that would fail any modern inspection. His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. I understand this is difficult for you, but business requires difficult decisions. Business, Simone repeated, the word tasting bitter. Is that what you call it when you erase people's livelihoods? When you destroy communities? I call it progress, Julian replied, his voice hardening slightly. That neighborhood has been declining for years. What I'm building will bring jobs, economic growth, revitalization. For whom? Not for the people who actually live there. Not for the families who've built their lives in those spaces. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. The air between them felt charged, crackling with tension that was about more than just their argument. "You don't know me, Miss Laurent," Julian said quietly, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "You've decided who I am based on headlines and assumptions? But perhaps I'm more complicated than your anger allows you to see. Then prove it," Simone challenged. "Don't demolish that building. Give us time to find alternatives, to relocate properly. Show me that you're not just another wealthy man who sees regular people as obstacles to his ambitions." Julian studied her for a long moment, and she felt like he was seeing past her chef's whites and her fury down to something raw and vulnerable she tried to keep hidden. When he spoke again, his voice carried a strange note, something between curiosity and calculation. "I have a proposition for you." Simone's stomach tightened. "I'm not interested in your money. Not money. An experience." He glanced at the dessert table behind her. "You're clearly a talented chef. Your food tonight has been exceptional. Cook for me. Private dinners, 30 consecutive days. At the end, if you can convince me through your craft that some things have value beyond economic metrics, I'll reconsider my plans for the building." She stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "You want me to cook for you? For a month? And in exchange, you might not destroy my restaurant?" "Might is the key word," he said. "I make no promises except to honestly reconsider. But at least it gives you a chance, which is more than you have right now." It was manipulation, obviously. Some bizarre power play by a man who was used to controlling every situation. But beneath the obvious trap, Simone heard something else in his voice. A genuine interest, perhaps. Or maybe loneliness. She wasn't sure which possibility disturbed her more. "Why would you want this?" she asked suspiciously. Julian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because someone once told me that the best way to understand people is to let them feed you. That food reveals truth in ways words cannot. I'd like to see if that's accurate." Against every instinct of self-preservation, against all logic and reason, Simone heard herself say, "Fine, I'll do it, but I have conditions." I expected nothing less. "This is purely professional. You don't get to ask about my personal life, and I maintain complete creative control over the menus." "Agreed. And when I prove to you that what you're planning is wrong, you follow through and save that building." Julian extended his hand. "When you prove it, if you prove it, we'll discuss options. Deal?" Simone looked at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything, that she was stepping into something far more complicated and dangerous than a simple business arrangement. But what choice did she have? This was her only chance to save everything she loved. She gripped his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, the strength in his fingers. Something electric passed between them at the contact, something that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her. "Deal," she whispered, and wondered what exactly she had just agreed to. The first night, Simone arrived at Julian's penthouse with her knives, her ingredients, and a wall of professional distance she was determined to maintain. His apartment occupied the entire top floor of the Meridian Tower, with floor-to-ceiling, windows that turned the city into a glittering carpet far below. The kitchen was a chef's dream, all marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that probably cost more than her entire restaurant's equipment combined. Everything was sleek, modern, and somehow impersonal, like a photograph from an architecture magazine rather than a place where someone actually lived. Julian met her at the private elevator, dressed more casually than at the gala. Dark jeans, a gray sweater that matched his eyes, bare feet that made him seem unexpectedly human. He watched her unpack her supplies with quiet attention, not offering to help, seeming to understand that she needed to claim this space as her own. Any dietary restrictions I should know about? Simone asked, keeping her tone businesslike. None. I'm at your mercy. She had planned the first menu carefully. Nothing too elaborate, nothing that screamed desperation or showed off. Simple French country cooking, the kind her grandmother had taught her. Coq au vin with herb-roasted potatoes, a salad of bitter greens and toasted walnuts, apple tarte tatin for dessert. Food that told a story about patience, tradition, and the kind of love that expressed itself through careful preparation. Julian sat at the kitchen island while she worked, a glass of wine in his hand. She had expected him to retreat to another room, to make phone calls or review documents, but he stayed, watching her dice onions with practiced precision, sear the chicken until the skin turned golden, deglaze the pan with red wine that filled the kitchen with rich, earthy fragrance. You're different when you cook, he observed after a long silence. Simone didn't look up from the carrots she was slicing. Different how? Calmer. Like this is where you make sense of the world. The accuracy of his observation unsettled her. Food is honest. You can't fake good technique or fresh ingredients. Either the dish works or it doesn't. There's a clarity in that. I understand that feeling, Julian said quietly. Architecture is similar. A building either serves its purpose or it fails. No amount of beautiful design can compensate for poor function. She wanted to argue with him, to point out that his buildings displaced people and destroyed communities. But something in his voice stopped her. There was a weariness there, a suggestion of burden she hadn't expected. They ate at his dining table, another expanse of minimalist design with a view that made her feel like they were floating above the world. Julian took his first bite of the coq au vin and closed his eyes, a small sound of appreciation escaping him that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. This is extraordinary, he said when he opened his eyes again. It tastes like memory, like coming home. That's exactly what it's supposed to taste like. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than Simone had anticipated. Julian asked about her training, her grandmother who had founded Maison Belle, the way recipes could carry entire histories in their ingredients. She found herself telling him stories she rarely shared, about learning to make stock at age 7, about burning her first souffle and crying in the pantry until her grandmother told her that failure was just the beginning of mastery. What? About you? Simone asked, surprising herself with genuine curiosity. How does someone become Julian Thorne, the man who reshapes cities? His expression shuddered slightly, that public mask sliding back into place. The usual path, business school, mentorship, calculated risks that paid off. That's the resume version. I want the real story. Julian was quiet for a long moment, spinning his wine glass between his fingers. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than she had heard it. My mother was a seamstress. She worked in a factory in the garment district, 12-hour. Days for minimum wage. The building was unsafe. Poor ventilation, faulty wiring, exits that didn't meet code. When I was 15, there was a fire. 17 people died, including her. Simone's breath caught. Julian, I'm so sorry. The building's owner faced minimal penalties. Some fines, probation, nothing that truly held him accountable. He's still wealthy, still respected, still owns properties across the city. Julian's jaw tightened. I decided that day that I would never be powerless again, that I would understand buildings so completely, own enough of them, that I could ensure they were safe. That no one else would lose their mother because someone prioritized profit over people's lives. The revelation shifted everything. Suddenly, his obsession with structural integrity, his willingness to demolish rather than compromise, made terrible sense. He wasn't just a wealthy man erasing the past for profit. He was someone haunted by tragedy, trying to prevent future horrors the only way he knew how. "The Bellwood building," Simone said slowly, understanding dawning. "Your inspections found it genuinely unsafe. You're not just trying to maximize profit. The electrical system is 50 years past its safe lifespan. The foundation has water damage that's compromising the structural supports. One major storm, one electrical surge, and that building could become a death trap." He met her eyes. "I'm not the villain you want me to be, Simone. I'm trying to keep people safe, even if my methods seem heartless." She should have felt relieved that his motivations were more complex than she had assumed. Instead, she felt the foundations of her anger crumbling, leaving her unsteady and confused. It was easier to fight him when he was a simple villain. This version of Julian, driven by grief and determination to protect others, was infinitely more dangerous to her resolve. Over the following weeks, the dinners became the center of Simone's world. Each night, she would arrive with new ingredients, new stories told through food. She made her grandmother's bouillabaisse rich with saffron and memory. She prepared delicate Vietnamese spring rolls taught to her by a line cook who had become family. She crafted elaborate desserts that spoke of celebration and joy and the sweetness that could exist even in difficult times. And each night Julian listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel seen and understood in a manner she had never experienced. He began to open up more, sharing pieces of himself he clearly kept hidden from the rest of the world. His fear of failure despite all his success. His loneliness in a life filled with people who wanted things from him. His secret love of old movies and classical music, interests that seemed at odds with his ruthless business reputation. The attraction that had sparked between them at the gala grew into something undeniable. Simone would feel his eyes on her as she cooked, a weight of attention that made her hyper-aware of every movement. Their hands would brush when passing plates, and the contact would linger just a moment too long. Conversations would stretch past. Midnight, wine glasses refilled, the city lights blurring into soft focus around them. On the 18th night, as Simone was preparing to leave, Julian caught her hand. "Stay," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. Every professional instinct screamed at her to refuse, to maintain the boundaries that were already dangerously thin. But her heart, that traitorous organ, was beating a different rhythm entirely. "This is complicated," she whispered, not pulling her hand away. "I know. If anyone finds out, they'll say I'm trading favors for the building. They'll destroy my reputation." "I know that, too." His thumb traced circles on her wrist, sending shivers through her entire body. "I'm not asking you to compromise yourself. Simone, I'm just asking you not to leave yet. Talk with me. Let me know you beyond the kitchen." She should have said no, should have walked away from this dangerous territory where professional and personal had become hopelessly tangled. But instead, she found herself sinking onto his couch, accepting another glass of wine, letting conversation carry them into the early morning hours. They talked about dreams deferred and second chances, about the price of ambition and the courage required to choose differently. Julian told her about the property development that had made his fortune, but cost him a relationship he still regretted. Simone admitted her fear that she had given so much to the restaurant that she had forgotten how to build a life outside those kitchen walls. As dawn began to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, Simone realized with startling clarity that she was falling for him. For this complicated, damaged, surprisingly tender man who carried grief like armor and used wealth to fight battles against ghosts only he could see. The realization terrified her, because in 12 more days their arrangement would end. And she would have to choose between the restaurant that was her legacy and the man who was becoming her future, between the safety of anger and the risk of love. She looked at Julian, at the vulnerability in his eyes as he watched the sunrise, and knew that whatever choice she made would shatter something precious. The only question was which piece of her heart she was willing to break. The photograph arrived on day 27. Simone was at Maison Belle, supervising the lunch service that had become increasingly sparse as word spread about the impending closure. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No words, just an image. Her and Julian on his terrace, silhouetted against the city lights, standing close enough that the intimacy was unmistakable. Below the photo, a caption, "Chef trades favors for building. Full story tomorrow." Her blood turned to ice. Someone had been watching them. Someone was about to destroy everything she had worked her entire life to build. The phone rang immediately. It was Julian. "I just got the same photo," he said without preamble, his voice tight with anger. "Along with a demand. They want me to proceed with the demolition as planned, publicly distance myself from you, or they release this to every media outlet in the city." Who would do this? Simone's hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the knife she was holding. "I have my suspicions. Give me a few hours." But Simone didn't have hours to wait, because as she stood there trying to process this nightmare, her business partner, Michel Durand, walked into the kitchen with an expression that made her stomach drop. Michel had been with Maison Belle for 8 years, her sous chef turned partner when she needed capital for renovations. They had built the restaurant's reputation together, or so she thought. But the guilt written across his face told a different story. "It was you," she said, the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. "You sent the photograph." Michel had the decency to look ashamed. "I didn't have a choice, Simone. I'm drowning in debt. The restaurant is failing. When Thorne's development company offered me money for information about his relationship with you, it was a lifeline. Julian's development company offered you this?" Confusion mixed with her anger. "That doesn't make sense." Not Julian himself. His business partner, Richard Castellano. He approached me weeks ago, said that Julian was becoming too soft, too distracted by personal matters, that the company needed the Bellwood project to proceed as planned, and I could help ensure that happened while also solving my financial problems. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Richard Castellano was Julian's oldest friend, the man who had been with him since the beginning of his real estate empire, and apparently, the man who was now betraying him. Simone pulled out her phone and called Julian back. When he answered, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "It's Richard. Your business partner is behind this." The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. When Julian spoke again, his voice was cold enough to freeze. "Where are you?" "At the restaurant." "Stay there. I'm coming." He arrived 20 minutes later, his usual composure fractured by fury and something that looked like deep hurt. Michel had already left, taking his cowardice with him. Julian stood in the empty dining room of Maison Belle, looking at the photographs on the walls, the worn but lovingly maintained furniture, the history written into every corner. "Richard has been siphoning money from the company for 2 years," Julian said quietly, pulling up financial documents on his phone. "I started auditing our accounts last month when numbers weren't adding up. He knew I was getting close to discovering his embezzlement. The Bellwood project is his last chance at a big payout before everything unravels. So he decided to manipulate both of us." Simone felt exhausted suddenly, the weight of the past month crashing over her. Make sure you went ahead with the demolition. Destroy my reputation if I got in the way. He didn't count on one thing. Julian looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He didn't count on me actually falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and terrifying and utterly transforming. Simone had imagined him saying those words 100 times over the past weeks, but hearing them now in the middle of this disaster made them somehow more real and more impossible simultaneously. Julian, we can't. The photograph will still come out. My reputation will be ruined. People will think I slept with you to save the restaurant. Then we give them a different story. He took her hands, his grip firm and warm. I'm holding a press conference this afternoon. I'm going to announce that I've discovered embezzlement in my company, that Richard Castellano will be removed and prosecuted, and that the Bellwood project is being completely reimagined. Reimagined how? Renovated, not demolished. It will cost me twice as much and take 3 times as long, but my engineers found a way to preserve the structure while addressing the safety issues. Your restaurant stays, the bookshop stays, the bakery stays, everything stays, and everything becomes safe. Tears were streaming down Simone's face before she realized she was crying. But Richard will release the photograph anyway. He'll try to make it look like you're doing this because of our relationship. Let him. Julian's voice was fierce. I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting fear dictate my choices. Yes, I'm renovating the building partially because I love the woman who owns the restaurant. I'm also doing it because it's the right thing to do, because preserving history and ensuring safety aren't mutually exclusive, because you taught me over 30 dinners that value can't always be measured in profit margins. This will damage your business reputation, Simone protested, even as hope was beginning to bloom in her chest. Then I'll rebuild it. I've done it before. I can do it again. He pulled her closer, until she could feel the solid warmth of him, until his heartbeat was audible beneath her ear. I spent 15 years building an empire to prove I wasn't powerless. But the real power is choosing. Love over fear, choosing you over reputation, choosing a complicated, messy, beautiful life over a safe and lonely one. Simone looked up at him, at this man who had started as her enemy and become her salvation. The press will have a field day with this story. Good. Let them write about the billionaire who changed his mind because a chef showed him that some things are worth more than money. Let them write about how love can transform even the most cynical heart. He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. Besides, I have a feeling you're going to become very famous. Your restaurant will have a waiting list for months once this story breaks. She laughed through her tears, the sound watery but genuine. You're absolutely insane. Probably. Is that a yes? A yes to what exactly? To us. To trying this thing between us without secrets or conditions. To building something together that's messy and complicated and real. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away her tears. To letting me love you openly, proudly, and completely. Simone had spent her entire life playing it safe, pouring all her passion into her cooking because it felt less dangerous, then giving her heart away. But standing here with Julian, feeling the way her soul seemed to recognize his, she realized that the greatest risk was not loving him. The greatest risk was letting fear win. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home and starting an adventure simultaneously. Like safety and excitement, comfort and passion, all tangled together in a way that made perfect sense. The restaurant around them held the memories of decades, but in this moment, they were creating something entirely new. The press conference that afternoon was everything Richard had feared and everything Julian promised. He stood before cameras, and reporters and announced not just the building renovation, but his relationship with Simone. He spoke about how she had challenged him, changed him, shown him that true vision meant preserving the past while building the future. Richard tried to spin the story his way, tried to paint Julian as compromised and weak. But the financial evidence of his embezzlement was damning, and his attempted blackmail only made him look more desperate. Within a week, he was facing criminal charges, and Julian's reputation, rather than being damaged, was enhanced by his honesty. Maison Belle not only survived but thrived. The publicity brought customers from across the city, people who wanted to taste the food that had transformed a billionaire's heart. Simone hired back her staff and expanded the menu, each dish a love letter to tradition and innovation intertwined. 6 months later, on a rooftop garden that Julian had created atop the renovated Bellwood building, Simone and Julian hosted a dinner for 50 people. Friends, family, former adversaries who had become allies. The garden was filled with herbs and vegetables that Simone used in her cooking, a living connection between earth and table. As the sun set and the city lights began their nightly dance, Julian pulled Simone aside. Below them, Maison Belle glowed warmly, its windows full of diners and laughter. Around them, people they loved celebrated the impossible thing they had, built together. "No regrets?" Julian asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Simone leaned into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid reality of this man who had risked everything for love. Not a single one. And as the stars emerged overhead and the city stretched out beneath them, full of stories and secrets and endless possibilities, Simone knew with absolute certainty that some recipes couldn't be written down. Some transformations couldn't be planned. Sometimes the most extraordinary things happened when you were brave enough to let your heart lead, to trust in love even when logic said it was impossible. The restaurant was saved. The building stood, strong, and two people who had started as enemies had found something neither knew they were searching for. A home in each other's hearts that no amount of money could buy and no force on earth could demolish. RUB